Participants joining us. So I will go ahead and get us started though, because I know that we only have exactly 1 hour. And I know that you powerful women will have a lot to say in that 1 hour. And I want to make sure that we get to this amazing conversation. And to let everyone know on the call, we will be taking questions. And so I invite you to put it in the chat box. But first, let me start by introducing myself. I'm Dorri McWhorter. I'm the CEO of the YWCA Metropolitan Chicago, and I'm thrilled that we can have a conversation around what we are calling economic RecovHERy, and making sure that we're designing an inclusive marketplace in this post-COVID world. So thrilled to be here with the amazing panelists that I will introduce to you shortly. But first, just wanted to really comment on the fact that we do have such a unique opportunity to reshape the economy so that it really is more equitable and inclusive for all people. It's really important at this time that we challenge the power structures on which the economy was built and lead the conversation on economic recovery to really make sure that we create generational and lasting change. I think about the industrial age and the series that I used to watch called The Men Who Built America. I'm like, that's interesting. Well, in 2020, I think it's about time for the women to rebuild America. And so I think we have an amazing panel that's going to help us do this. One of my favorite quotes, in fact, is by Buckminster Fuller, so the futurist, the architect, the humanitarian. And he says that to change things, you don't fight the existing reality, you create new models that make the old models obsolete. And I think it's about time that many of the models that we've been working with go. And so with that, I actually will turn it over to begin the introductions of our amazing panelists, starting with the YWCA Metropolitan Chicago's Chief Equity Officer, Martina Hone. Welcome, Tina.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Martina Hone, Chief Equity Officer, and we were supposed to do our own introduction, and so here goes. I'm a social justice warrior, and I've decided to not shy away from the word warrior because that's what I am. I have been a warrior since the day I was born, and the nurses weren't going to give me to my African-American mother because they couldn't believe I was her child. And I apparently screamed bloody murder. So that's where it began. I've had the privilege throughout my career to work on a broad array of social justice issues, from sentencing disparities to environmental racism, voting rights, immigrant rights, ending the achievement gap. The list goes on and on. If there was a battle to be fought, I was on the field. It's my particular privilege now to be part of YWCA's team and really focusing on what I consider one of the ultimate battles, which is making our economy equitable, inclusive, and just. And the reason that's so important is because everything that I've ever worked on, every social ill that needs to be cured, at the end of the day, it traces back to disparities and inequities in our economy. And so in this historic moment, when we have a true opportunity to reset the economic conditions on which all of us stand, it's just, a phenomenal opportunity for me, and I know all of my colleagues at YWCA, to make this world better by changing that economy. Thank you.
Thank you, Tina. I'm a Wonder Woman fan, so I like warrior princesses. So thank you for that introduction. I know you're a great warrior. So Joy Anderson, the president of Criterion Institute, would love to hear your background.
Well, I started my career as a high school teacher in Brooklyn, New York. And I thought of that building on your comments, Tina, because what I learned, what motivates me still to this day, is looking into the eyes of the kids that I was teaching in an inner city school in Brooklyn, to distinguish between, you could see in their eyes the difference between the kids who thought they were going to survive the system and the kids who thought they could change it. And so the sort of my life's work has been not just to be a warrior. I think I can be pretty badass when I want to. Tina, we can go toe to toe. We've seen that. But not just to be a warrior myself, but to show that people, to show the power that others have in shaping the world. And so Criterion's work is focused on that empowerment, that equipping in the obscure system of finance, right? So while many social justice organizations are focused on raising the voices of activists to be able to shape government policies, to build civil society, our role is to make that connection to systems of finance and to expand who sees themselves as able to use finance as a tool for social change. And right now, that has never been more important than right now. Because if we watch the news every day, it is so much the imagination of people in finance who are funding our recovery and are naming what recovery looks like and on whose terms we've successfully accomplished that, right? You go back and you quote somebody who's looking at how the economy will recover, which for many people, I was just reading a thing in the New York Times where for many people that's equated with whether or not the stock market rebounds, because recovering the economy is about their assets going back up. Well, not for most of us, right? Like, yes, that matters in our pension funds, but for the average Joe and Jill and Betty, it matters whether or not our economies are thriving and whether or not we have our livelihoods and whether or not we have dignity and whether or not we have bloody jobs. And so within that, I think this is a really important time, and Teresa and I have been scheming a little bit about what's the role of, in particular, women's rights organizations in this, right? How do we think about, in general, in the women's movement, we don't always think about showing up, we think about naming the problems and engaging the government, but not as often directly engaging systems of finance and shaping what are seen as opportunities, what are seen as risks, and how do we challenge the structures of power and who has what power within that system.
Absolutely, Joy. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna have to cut her off because she's about to go on a roll before I get Teresa introduced in here. So Teresa, please introduce yourself so we can start this party.
Yeah, I just have to say I'm so honored to be in this conversation with these badass women, and I'm super excited. My name's Teresa Younger. I'm the president and CEO of the Ms. Foundation for Women. And since folks told a little about their lives, I actually am a lifelong Girl Scout. And I grew up believing that it was my responsibility to make the world a better place. And that meant organizing the hell out of getting it all done. So I'm an advocate and an activist. I've spent the past 6 years at the Ms. Foundation, which is the oldest public women's foundation in the world. And the idea that we are functioning under and have functioned under in the past is that it is about lifting up and amplifying the voices of women and girls, particularly women and girls of color. Those most impacted need to be able to provide the solutions. And so I'm inspired all of the time by the Audre Lorde quote, "There's no such thing as single issue struggles because we don't lead single issue lives." And that means that when we come to the table, we get to bring all of ourselves. And what we know is that none of the systems that are in play today were designed for us or by us. So that means this is our opportunity to like re-break those down. Prior to coming to the Ms. Foundation, I spent 8 years working in state public policy, running the Women's Commission in Connecticut. And so I come at this work from both the policy side and organizing side. And as Joy mentioned, the ability to figure out how do we ask the key questions in the spaces where I think sometimes women have felt least secure, but where we have the most expertise, and not talking about it from a place of, you need to do this for us. That in and of itself is the wrong place to start. We are experts in what we know, and we need to come to these conversations in a place of power. And we actually need to do it in a way that allows us to ask the questions, challenge, and actually be seen for the value that we bring to the table. And I'm sure we'll get into that when we're talking, because I know Tina is like chomping at the bit on that. But there's a real conversation to be had about what this recovery looks like as we place a value on the frontline workers that are women doing the work in our economy. And so I'm super excited to be part of this. And Dorri, thank you so much for inviting me to be in conversation with these badass women that I just adore so much. So thank you.
Absolutely. And I might need we may need to have an after party after this party, because I know that you all can bring so much to this topic. So Teresa, let's get started with you as we talk about this time, this moment in time being about COVID. And you as a foundation, we saw a lot of different responses to this time, particularly around how to serve the community by creating special COVID response funds. But yet you as the Ms. Foundation said, yeah, no, we're gonna pass on that. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I know, it might be the wrong thing at the end of the day, I say, but one of the things that I think we have to remember is that this moment in time, this quote unquote COVID moment, is just a bright light on what was already going on. And so I didn't want folks to be in the mindset that all of the sudden these were problems. Not all of a sudden these were problems. Women's work had never been valued. So the fact that now we have women on the front lines who are hourly workers who don't have health care, or folks who are losing their health care, and we don't have child care because our country has never valued that. Like, there was a whole bunch of conversations going on that were completely connected, that all of a sudden folks were like, oh, COVID-19. No, before COVID-19, it is only highlighting all of the disparities that we are seeing. And so we need to double down on what we already know, which is capitalism, sexism, racism, xenophobia, all of the isms that are sitting out there, including the patriarchy, have always been there. They are just being spotlighted by COVID. And so at the Ms. Foundation, what we've said is, let's stop pretending and speak truths. The truth is that this country needs to come together and hear from those most impacted. And it is not just because of COVID-19. We will take advantage of what this looks like, but it's not because of COVID that we have health disparities. It is not because of COVID that people are unsafe and that there's heightened levels of sexual and domestic abuse. It is not because of COVID, right? What we are seeing is because society had not placed value and had not resolved these. And now this is our opportunity to double down on what we know, which is that it is time that we trust and believe women, and that we trust and believe that they have some solutions that can move us forward.
Absolutely. So, and I want you, Teresa, I'm second guessing that, because I believe that you're going to be on the right side of history relative to that response fund. But Tina, let's drill into that a little more, because it is a challenging time. So how do we balance now sort of protecting people, but still challenging the status quo? Because we know because of COVID, all the issues that Teresa named are absolutely amplified, but that doesn't mean we have to just keep using COVID as a scapegoat. So what do you think about how do we move forward in protecting people and still challenge the status quo?
I think there are a lot of elements to that question, and I so appreciate everything that all my new best friends have said today. I'm a lawyer by training, and any lawyer who's on the call knows that the first thing you're taught is to issue spot. the issue spotting is like the easiest game, all right? Like what you have to do now is to be able to show what you're going to do with the issue. And so on issue spotting, the awareness of the disparities that, you know, as Teresa said, have existed forever. So it's maddening to me that people are acting like, oh, this just happened. But now you can't turn your head. There's nowhere to look for you to avert your eyes without seeing this. But I also think that in terms of solutions, everything that our sisters need who are on the lower socioeconomic rungs of this ladder need to be fixed. And there's no question about that. Everyone should have health care. Childcare is not just a social service, it's a business. It's a business disproportionately that are disproportionately owned by women and disproportionately peopled by women who are not properly paid for the importance of the work that they do. And so I would like this period to sort of break this mythology that childcare is just a cute little thing. It is a vital foundation to our economy. It is a business, it is an industry, and the people who both own that industry who are women and who work in that industry who are women need to be fairly paid as well and given a path to advancement. And that's the other thing that's sort of like not talked about a lot in these conversations. And so all the safety net pieces need to be put in place, but there also has to be a pathway to advancement. And like Teresa, I came out of the policy world, mainly the 22 years in Washington. I look to policy as the way to fix system change and to implement system change versus sort of the retail work on the ground. We can't, in my view, we can't get to a new economy and a better economy unless we look at all rungs of the economy. And so the dearth of women in leadership positions in this country, both economically in the business world, sorry guys, in the business world and in the political world, can't be forgotten. So all the focus now, as it should be, is on the essential worker, but we don't change this economy if we don't change the leadership structure of the economy. And so one of the most striking examples is 80% of the healthcare workforce is women. 4% of the CEOs of healthcare companies are women. Only 19% of women overall are on corporate boards. Only 9% of venture capital leads are women. Women have the majority of PhDs in this country and that's been the case for over 30 years. We're only 30% of college presidents. The list again goes on and on. You know, at the political level, you know, we're 23%, 24% of Congress. We're 0% of the White House. That's got to change. Only about 20% of big city mayors, including our great mayor, are women. We can't change the system if the people who are at the helm of the system aren't us. And it's not just because they're women, because there are plenty of women who I'm like, yeah, sister, no, bye. But what you see though in Hollywood, for example, where only about 20% of the producers, directors, cinematographers, the people with the power behind the scenes in the movies are women. But what you see is because women wear a different type of glasses than men, the films that they produce, the characters that they create, they give a much more valid picture of who women are. And so we just cannot ignore the importance of looking at the entire ecosystem of this economy, not just saving the downtrodden, which so many people love to do because it makes them feel good, right? But to empower all of us, including women, putting women where they rightfully belong at all levels of this economy, including the leadership of this economy.
Thank you, Tina. So Joy, I know you know just a little bit about power structures, particularly when we're talking about where the money flows. So where do you see sort of the evolution that we have this opportunity? Both of your colleagues talked about that it's time for this change, but based on your view, where do you see the opportunity for the women's movement to continue to evolve, including in the financial spaces, whether it's endowment or the broad or other, the markets? I just want your view on where we can evolve in this women's movement.
Yeah, no, I was thinking about a small pun that I'm not going to sure if I'm going to pull it up, but I'll work on it. We can't shelter at home to get to systems change, and it's not going to work yet. There's something about the fact that we're all isolated in our homes. All right, I'll work on delivery here, Teresa. But it's an interesting moment where I'm hearing lots of folks say, what I got to do right now is take care of my community. And I want to say yes, of course. And a set of us need to figure out how we're continuing to look at the broader systems change and step up to that. And I actually think it is interesting to, it's interesting to think through how in this moment we can exert influence. And as I was thinking about the statistics that Tina was just running through, I think often what our reaction to those statistics is we're not at that table, therefore we don't have the ability to influence those tables, and then we step back, right? So we talk a lot about how people can step up and change systems of finance, which the statistics run right along with everything you just laid out at less than 20% still in systems of finance of, the numbers of how many, what proportion of venture capital controlled by women. These numbers are, disastrously low. And so we need to be scrappy, right? We got to figure out, how do we influence systems of power that we may not have all the power in? And part of that is, I learned actually working with women's funds around the country, and I guess around the world. We were talking to them for a while in early days of, so I sit in this field of gender lens investing, of how to look at the connection between making investments to make a difference on gender equality and more broadly to transform the systems of power that keep so many of these structural inequities in place. And in those early conversations, we'd go to folks and talk to them about their endowments. And they'd say, well, I don't have a big endowment. Right? I don't have enough money in my endowment to feel like I'm setting the rules of capital. And there was a moment where it flipped in my head and said, this isn't actually about money. This is about knowledge, networks, and influence. It's the thing we have within the women's movement at our best is the ability to organize concerted influence, not just our own influence, but how do we actually organize influence to be able to make a difference on systems of power. And so one is, it's not just our own individual influence, but how do we inspire people to use their power to disrupt systems of power? And keep calling on people to do that. Because if we're not calling on people to do that, we all know how comfy everybody gets. Well, I can't do that right now. That's going to take me a little bit longer. I got to figure this out. But now's the moment when we need to be taking risks with that social capital and saying, I'm going to make some phone calls. My friend Vicki Saunders, who runs an organization called SheEO out of Canada, is sort of she's on a rampage these days of figuring out how do we get folks willing to take risks, to step up and move things. So one is, it's about the influence, and that comes because we're networked, right? That comes because we're connected. That comes because we've had a history of organizing. And so how do we leverage that together? But for us, the most important piece is actually knowledge. Right, and Dorri, these are conversations that you and I have, like the role of YWCA in actually knowing what's happening on the ground in Chicago is tremendous, right? But we discount that because we haven't translated that to sound like a Wall Street report on which stocks you should pick, right? Okay, well, you have, because you've got that ETF and everything, so you do that. But anyway, I'm saying most people are not But the question is, how do we take the knowledge that we have, and really for me, it's about, Tina, exactly what you were saying in terms of, you know, the care economy, the reality of women as frontline workers, the reality of what happens with gender-based violence in these online platforms, right? What's happening there? Like, how do we talk about that? And so that the people who are making decisions are informed. And what do we, you know, will they listen? I don't know. Let's use our power to get them to listen, right? And to figure out what are the different ways to frame this.
Absolutely. So Tina, just to play off as Joy outlined, we do know a lot, right? Because we are a direct service organization, so we get information from and are informed by the work that we do on a daily basis. But I want to get your perspective of how do we see, I guess, the expectations of the roles that we play as being a feminist organization, a women's organization. How are we seeing sort of those expectations sort of change in this moment, and being able to provide this information to have better decisions made? What are you seeing as you continue to reach out to policymakers and make sure that our voice is heard as these decisions are being made? What are you seeing at this time?
I appreciate that. Again, there's still a lot of issue spotting, a lot of awareness. And I'm really proud of the work that we've been doing on childcare and really leaning in on childcare has to be looked at as foundational and as an industry. And I think that's hit some pay dirt. But I think some of the other questions and some of the other things that we need to look to really restart this economy, we're still in crisis mode. People are still trying to put bandages on the bleeding. And I don't know if I've been hearing enough out of the policy arena yet, right? There's some great thinkers out there, but again, everybody's in panic mode right now about how do we fix this. I think one of the things that I know in my research and what I've been reading about women just generally, I'm kind of obsessed with women in leadership. It go on and on. But one of the truisms, if you will, is that for the most part, women are motivated differently economically than men are, right? And so just the financial bottom line is often not enough for women. And I will say this new generation of millennials where the gender issues are becoming a little bit less like stark. I see the youngins of both sexes being more motivated by purpose, by contributing to society, by making their community and their world a better place. And I bring that up not like as a feel-good thing, but one of the challenges in terms of women making it to leadership again is if the metrics against which we are measured as leaders are the metrics that the boys are used to measuring, then we never actually make it through. We can lean in all we want, but if I'm leaning into a world that does not value what I value, then my leadership qualities are not going to be advanced. I think one of the other things is, and again, women tend to need to be, and this is particularly the case I know in the political arena, we tend to need to be invited to run, whereas men were like, it's my birthright to run, right? And so part of it is we've got to get past that, but part of it is that if the reality is women need to be invited to run, then damn it, we need to start inviting. And if women need to be invited to be leaders, if studies are true that they show that women may have self-doubts about their leadership, then we need to build in workplaces that reinforce our styles of leadership and what we care about and what we value, because we can't keep, like your boy Bucky would say, I can't keep banging my head against a structure, right, that is built against me, right? I can't change this economy unless I change the principles of what is valued in this economy. And then women's leadership, I think, will find greater value within it.
Absolutely. So Tina, you mentioned issue spotting. So let's talk a little bit about what we should do and what we could do. A couple things, I see a great dialogue going on in the chat, so I'm going to ask this question, then I'm also going to start pulling for some of the questions that we have in the chat. But ladies, what should we do? I want to go round robin on this. So, but Teresa, I'll start with you. What should we do? What should we be thinking about?
So we need to be thinking about a couple of things. We need to be thinking about the fact that nonprofits are business models in this country, and that they are, those women who are leading the nonprofits, the majority of women leading nonprofits under $500,000 are led by women of color. And so women as business owners, not just in the entrepreneurial mode that seems so obvious to the SBA, but to the communities that they serve, actually need to be seen in what Tina just approached and talked about as leaders, and who have expertise in what we are talking about and what we are trying to do, and actually need to go one step further. We actually need to stop thinking that leadership and influence and power happens only in Washington, D.C. We will see, as we are doing this recovery right now, that it's going to be all local. And so women and folks who believe that we need to redefine what structures look like and how we can influence them and what they need to look like. Influence can happen really close when you're talking to your local city council person, or you are talking to your state representative, or to your governor, right? And so you can be talking about things like, what would it look like if we honestly had portable healthcare services and retirement services so folks could move from place to place, right? And we weren't locked to our jobs for healthcare. We could asking about the restructure of what that could look like, and cities get to be the testing point for what happens. We also have to stop being polite, and I really appreciate what was said by my colleagues in this. We actually have to stop being polite. We know what to do. We actually have to be willing to take the risk and to fail, rather than assume that we can't take a risk at all unless it's perfect. And this is one of the realities of that spectrum. And then we need to look at our own personal mechanisms for power. So if you have a retirement account, if you don't have the answer, you need to ask the question so that you feel confident in what you are doing. And guess what? Asking a question, a random question about what would it look like if every household had a guaranteed income, so that when we went through the decision making, which was to let in the United States, it was to let everybody become unemployed. So we now have an unemployment rate of 20%. In Germany and in other countries, they actually employed people. They actually paid people to stay on the rolls, to be able to continue to contribute to the economics of their community, and then be able to engage in a different kind of conversation. What was done in this country was I think a strategic mindset to disempower people and to get us worried about the things that don't allow us to hold our power to move forward, right? So we are seeing nonprofits struggling, and then we saw small businesses struggling, right? We came out with the first CARE Act that actually didn't center the fastest growing businesses in this country, which were women of color owned businesses, right? So we actually have to just, I think we have to just be bold. What have we got to lose if we're not just bold right now? And so starting with what influence do I have? I can talk to my kids about money. I can become comfortable with what those questions are. I can ask my elected officials. I can run for political office every day. I can be, moving things forward. And then we can say, what is the broader conversation, right? We don't use gender in any way, shape, or form to help decide or make determinations about our budget practices. Not locally, not nationally, not federally, right? And that could really change how we make our decisions. If we make our decisions based on our experiences and understand that our experiences are valuable.
Thank you, Teresa. Joy, following on that, what can we do? I'll say this too, because Joy is a good question asker, if that's a word. So Joy, what can we do? Because I know you like to ask big questions that make people think.
Well, yeah, I was saying amen a little bit on Teresa's point about asking the question. You'll ask it in a somewhat different setting sometimes than I am. I think there's a because I just think we need to ask different questions in this financial context, right? So one of the things we've been looking at recently is officially, are the financial managers, the people who are managing capital right now, they don't know. They don't know, right? They're writing a new white paper on a daily basis because they don't know. And everything is unprecedented. But remarkably, Tina, back to your point on metrics, they're using the same metrics they used before, right? Because that's what they know to go to, right? That's their go-to moment, right? And it's leading indicators of the recovery of economy. Economies recover always in the same way. I'm like, one of the things that came out of 2008 that was, for all the catastrophes that recession caused, one of the bright linings was that we were able to acknowledge that the sort of systems of finance that we all thought were designed in this way to keep our assets propped up, that it was actually those systems of finance that caused a significant amount of that economic disruption. Now that is not as true this time, right? We got the same trajectory of the problems. I mean, 200%, Teresa, these problems existed before. We have simply revealed the problems, not created net new ones. And so the question is, how do we shape the metrics of the recovery? And I think this is a place where we need to be really loud and really organized, right? Because otherwise it will be defined for us. So for example, one of the critical things that we're concerned about is in moments of recovery, the pressure on getting women back to work, and particularly and people of color, getting women and people of color back to work in the United States is not a leading indicator. It's we look overall at employment, right? And so in general, we get white men, just to be really clear about it, back to work first. And then there's a cascade effect, right? And so part of that is we need to name the indicator, and as sort of the question of, are businesses owned by Black and Hispanic women in the United States, are those recovering, and at what pace is the indicator we should be looking for, right? So in any place where people are having conversations, or if you sit on a board, or you're sitting in a, I remember I sat on the board of a foundation during after 2008, and meeting after meeting after meeting, the folks would come into the room, our advisors would come in and say, here's how the large cap US stocks are going. I'm like, tell me how micro businesses are going. Tell me that. And until you can tell me that, I don't believe that you actually understand what's happening in the economy, and you're not making bets. So we have had an explosion of gender-based violence in this moment. Catastrophic amounts of gender-based, it was horrid before, it's off the charts now. We don't have a chart to measure how much gender-based violence is happening right now. And we can prove that gender-based violence leads to political instability. We know that. We know that those two things happen at the same time. So why aren't we saying that the astronomical level of gender-based violence that's happening in our world today is a key signal that we are not stably recovering? And until that gets addressed, then we're not moving into a stable recovery. these kinds of things are, you know, we often think of like, we talk about gender-based violence all the time in finance. We have this campaign to prove that you can use finance as one of the many, many things necessary to address gender-based violence. And the other piece that's so important in that is to imagine that we could change it, right? Where we get stuck is, well, yeah, it sucks for women, but you know, men are stuck at home and that's just what happens. I'm like, oh, no, that doesn't have to be what happens. Like that could just not happen, right? Why don't we suggest that that not happen? And so we put out lots of visions of like, what if in the rebuilding of the economy, we radically reduced gender-based violence in the hospitality industry or in agriculture or in places where women are fundamentally at risk at work? And how would we decrease that? And how would we bet? How do we bet on a recovery where that happens? And Dorri, I'll close with the joke that you just so I was giving a speech once a couple years ago, and I raised this question of like, what would it look like if we cut gender-based violence in half? How would you actually make a bet on those investments, right? So framing the idea that you could bet on a different possibility. And this very nice man in the audience raised his hand and very respectfully said, "Don't you think that's just a little Pollyanna, Joy?" And he maybe even said Dr. Ann or something really very respectfully. "Don't you think that's a little Pollyanna?" And I kind of lost it at that moment and said, how come Elon Musk gets to say that we're going to live on Mars? And I suggest that we're going to radically reduce gender-based violence, and I'm Pollyanna. And so we have to stop apologizing for the way we frame what is possible in this recovery and say, oh, that could not. Bullshit. This can happen, and we can figure out how to make it happen, but it won't happen if we don't believe it's possible.
Oh, Dr. Joy, that made me so happy. Dr. Anderson, that made me so happy. Tina, I mean, what are your thoughts on this? I'll let you comment on what should we do, and then I'm going to go to the panelists, or excuse me, Joy, you got me so frazzled. I'm going to go to the chat box. I just love, because you know I like to dream big, and I'm just like, why is my favorite question. Go ahead, Tina.
So many things, but one of the things that I have to come back to is wealth gives you power and power gives you freedom. And the other thing that's inextricably linked to gender-based violence is women's lack of economic power. And women are locked in houses with men who beat them because they don't have the economic power to leave. I know there are other complications to that, but it's not a coincidence that people have tried to oppress others by holding power over the purse. And, you know, whether it's minority men who don't have the full economic power or women of all races who don't have economic power. Without economic power, you don't have freedom. And without freedom, you really can't do much of anything in this country. And I really wanted to emphasize that. And I also want to emphasize the impact of the trauma that we're going to see on the other side of this, from women and their children being trapped in homes where there is a tremendous amount of violence. Studies have shown, and people keep asking me for citations, this was a University of Chicago crime lab study, that children who are exposed to domestic violence, it's not just that they then become either the victims or perpetrators of domestic violence, they become violent. They perpetrate crimes even beyond domestic violence. And so for the safety and sanctity of our nation, we have to deal with the domestic violence issue. But we don't deal with any of this unless we figure out a fair, just, and inclusive way to divide up this pie and to restart this economy. Because be clear, you know, I went to University of Chicago, I'm a nerd. This economy can restart, and it can absolutely restart same way it had been operating. But shame on us if we don't figure out how to seize this moment. And I do want to jump in. There was one thing in the chat that really struck me, and it was about ageism. I may be the only person on this panel who's over 50. Ageism is real. and the investment. And I'm really serious about this. Even all the studies that I've read, right, about everything. We're gonna get young women into politics. We're gonna help young women progress up their careers. There needs to be investment in women wherever they are. Because we did not get sent out to, the pasture just because we turned 50, right? And our wisdom brings something to the table. And so that might have gotten lost and all that, but I saw ageism and I picked up on it. And then one final thing, civility is in the eye of the beholder. And the people who define the term civilized are the same people who said that Native people and African Americans and Africans were not civilized. So whenever somebody talks to me about politeness and civility, I think about like who set those rules and why they set them, right? Because they set them for their standards, because my standards of what's civil and my standards of what's fair and right, I care about justice. And if I have to be uncivil to get justice done, then you're just gonna have to deal with that. But I just, we can't be polite. They do that on purpose to hold us back.
Thank you. I think you all gave so many ranges, a wide range of what we should do. And I know that each of you are digging in your respective areas to continue to make sure that we are absolutely engaging women in these conversations. I'm going to go to some of the chat questions. One of the questions that jumped out was where my friends, excuse me for my little scroll finger being kind of slow, but we had a friend out of DC that had wanted to join you badass, or she's actually a badass woman of color wanting to join you other badass women, and being based in DC, and how can she put her talents to work here. I'll say a couple of things and I'll turn this over to the panelists as well. At the YWCA Metropolitan Chicago, we talk about all of these issues really being not that complicated, because as Joy had pointed out, we solve the things that we focus on. So none of this is unachievable. It's the ability and the will to do these things, but it also starts at very much the individual levels as well as the system levels. So what we talk about is that we look at ways that we can absolutely, how we give. We didn't talk about the lack of giving in the philanthropic area to women and women of color, but we control our own purse strings. So where we give matters and how we give matters, right? There's also a component of that where we spend our dollars. We talk about, dollars count, dollars matter, and we're seeing that more and more. There's some companies that haven't missed a beat. So we need to be more mindful about how we direct our dollars, where we invest our dollars. Joy talks a lot about this, but our dollars and how we direct those investments matter. So there's things that we can absolutely do at the individual level, as well as things, and I'll turn it over to the panel if you have any quick thoughts that you want to share around how people can get involved. Because I just want to make sure that people need to know that you can do good sitting right here or make change sitting right here, but there's a spectrum of things that you can do. It doesn't always have to be something out there, because sometimes it's out there that gets people caught up in how they make change. But there's lots of things you can do, and I'd like the panel to address that while I go on to find more questions in the chat. Whoever wants to start. Thank you, Teresa.
I would just say, there are lots of spaces and places. If you've got time, you've got energy, I always say time, talent, and treasure. If you've got any of those that you are willing to extend out, you could look at the Washington Area Women's Foundation. You can look at the YW in your area. You can look at other girl and women serving organizations within your communities. And I will tell you, if you contacted the Washington Area Women's Foundation, they would give you a list of organizations that are impacting women and girls in the community in the DC area. So those are some things you can do. I oftentimes say, what Dorri just mentioned, which is make conscious choices and educate yourself, and then talk about it. Sometimes we think people don't want to hear what we have to say. People actually want to hear what you have to say. So lead the conversation amongst your friends. Why did they shop there? What are they doing over there? How does their dollar get impacted? What are they doing Where did they go to college and university? What does the endowment look like at that college or university? How are they investing their money? How many women are on those boards that you, of institutions and organizations that you care about? How many of them are women of color? How many are not just coming from the same place, but that are coming from a very broad background, so that we recognize and understand everybody's experience has real value and where we're trying to go. So I think it's about talking and embracing, and then, you know, looking for where you want to have your greatest impact. And there's lots of places. So feel free to reach out if you're looking for something specific.
Thank you. I have another question in the chat, that as we talk about looking at our youth, how can we be messaging, mentoring them to prepare them to also participate in the change? And how can we influence and prepare and teach them to take lead in these issues? So how do we engage our youth? To anyone who wants to answer, I'm sorry. I'll start calling. I know you all don't want to jump in.
Yeah.
You want to go, Tina?
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, I think one of the first things is to make sure that youth feel that they're relevant, right? And because if you feel, again, powerless, and you don't understand your relevance, it's very hard to engage. And so helping young people understand their relevance is incredibly important. And I think to the prior question, understanding that you can impact at different levels. Some of us are community organizers. Some of us operate at the strategic level. They're both incredibly important, and there's all kinds of stuff in between. And so understanding your strength and understanding where your contribution for who you are will have the most impact is also very important, not just for youth, but for anyone who wants to engage in this work.
I'll build on that quickly, just because I have a 21-year-old who's never expected to live at home again, and so I'm feeling it personally, but I think it's a catastrophic moment in all kinds of ways for our youth right now. But I think one of the things that I am struck by is that we need to not forget our power to invite. And I actually think, I don't know, this generation or whatever, I notice, right, that folks in younger generations aren't waiting to be invited. They're using their power to invite. And I think this is a critical moment at that time to, and especially those of us over 50, sorry, Tina, I think we're all over 50. So for those of us over 50, sorry, I have a baby face, but pushing it.
Y'all all look so good.
And I round up all the time. I always round up, so I'm 50 too.
I gotcha. You can play with us. But I think part of it is how can we use those of us who've been around a block maybe 4 more times or something, how can we use our power to support the radical invitations that our peers who are younger than us are offering? And how do we step into that place and use our power to support them exercising their power? Because I actually think at some point there's not always that much we need to teach them. We just need, because we have a little bit more stability, we have a little bit more standing, and can we give them air cover to be able to do the bold things that they're called to do?
Yeah, Joy, I oftentimes say, how uncomfortable are we willing to be to support somebody else in there? And young people are coming up with a whole bunch of ideas and questions, and how uncomfortable, because we're still playing with what we know, how uncomfortable are we really willing to be to dream with them and not dream for them? And I think that's really, so critical in that space that we're sitting in, because they are holding an abundance of knowledge and opportunity that so many of us didn't grow up with in the same way, right? The level of connectedness that we didn't grow up with in the same way. and they are willing to hold their seat, and we actually need to give them the chair and 4 other chairs if that's what they need to have, or we just need to stand next to them.
Yeah.
I've been embracing.
Sorry.
Now, I've been embracing the word vulnerable lately in my life, and it's interesting because accepting that you don't have all the answers, right, is one of the hardest things to admit. Generationally, like, not only do we not have all the answers, but to your point, the young people grew up with a whole new set of tools that allow them to be way more effective at this than we ever could have been, because we didn't have those tools. And so I want us to be comfortable with being vulnerable, that there are people who know more than us and may be able to do this better than us.
So Joy, because I know you're about to jump in on the comment. So what I'll ask, because we only have 4 minutes left and I need to close this out, but I want to give you all sort of your parting comments and thoughts. Do trust that this isn't the last time we're having this conversation, as I know the work that we all continue to do on a daily basis, but just wanted to give you a few seconds to provide any additional closing thoughts you may have. And I'll start with you, Joy, and I'll wrap with you, Tina. I'm just going around my little screen here. So Joy?
Yeah, I'm feeling this stir in me today. We were on a call earlier today, and because I think we've talked about lots of things broadly. I'll just name one call to action for myself today. I think we got to do something about student debt. Like, we're all going to choose our moment of where we're going to weigh in, but just thinking about the question about the youth today, right? And we're working on this stuff around microfinance globally, and we provided access to financial systems for all kinds of folks that now, in a moment of crisis, have just left them with a ton of debt, right? So we have invited people in to advance, their own education and move things forward. And a lot of them are left holding the bag right now. And there's a whole bunch of people making a ton of money on that. And so part of my so anyway, I'll bring it down and just say on this call, this year, I'm going to do something about student debt and figure out if we can find more compassionate ways to figure out how to have people work out of it.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Joy. Tina or Teresa?
I'll go. Okay, I'll go. I actually just want to close with Audre Lorde is like somebody who just fills my soul all the time, and I want to end with a quote with something that she has said, because I think it tells so much right now. And she says, "When I dare to be powerful, to use my strength in the service of my vision, then it becomes less and less important whether I am afraid." And so what I would say is, let's use our power to visualize a feminist future that includes all of us, and be bold enough to step forward and challenge the systems and structures that are out there, and to do it ourselves.
Okay. Thank you, Teresa.
To that I add amen. I should have just let you go last, so couldn't say anything more.
Well, so we know that Teresa is always the closer, so that was perfect. So ladies, I have to thank you. I just love each of you. You are amazing human beings, and I just am so grateful that I get to be on this earth during this time so that I could walk in your presence. So thank you for allowing me to participate and have this discussion with you. I'll leave my 2 favorite quotes. One I was going to leave with, but then you inspire me, Teresa, to name another one. But one of my favorite quotes I actually heard directly from an individual that was testifying before Congress around the impacts of it was Dodd-Frank, but that's another financial story. Anywho, but what he said that which is done for us and not with us is done to us. And I want us to lead with that as we think about how this economic RecovHERy happens, that women absolutely have to be at the table. We have to ask the questions. We may not know all the answers, but damn it, we have to ask the question, because there will be a perspective that we bring to that question that someone may not have thought about. So I need us to do that. And then my other quote is by Angela Davis, who says that I can no longer accept the things I cannot change. I am changing the things I cannot accept. And I think of that as I look at you all, because I know that you all are absolutely changing the things that you cannot accept. And I'm just happy that we get to do that in partnership together. So thank you all. Thank you all for joining us and taking your time to be inspired. The chat was amazing. And I just know that we can do this, ladies. This is our time to rebuild America. So with that, thank you and have a wonderful rest of the week. And we'll see you on the front lines and the sidelines and the sky. We'll be everywhere. So thank you, ladies. Have a wonderful day. Thank you, everyone.